welcome to a series of tutorials about Playmaker in Unity. Hopefully this will be the first of many, and the first one here is about Xbox controller input. In this scene I've created three objects: a character, a floor and a camera. The camera needs to be positioned where it faces onto the character so that you can see the character move when we press the button. If you want to follow along with the tutorial, now would be a good point to pause the video and basically make up a scene yourself that looks similar. The first thing we need to do now is to go into the Unity project settings. In this case we're going to go into project settings and set up the joypad input. So first of all, select Edit from the Unity menu, then come down and select Project Settings. From there, you'll select Input, and the input parameters will show up in the inspector. The inspector should now have the Unity default settings for keyboard and mouse. The axis parameter shows the current number of inputs we have for Unity. In this case, we're going to add one for the joystick control. Increase the axis size by 1. And after you've hit return, you will see a new input added, which will be identical to the one above, but we're going to change that so it refers to the A button. On the left you will see a list of the settings and parameters that we've changed. The most important is the name. In this case we've called it A button. This is a parameter name that we will use when we actually set up the Playmaker FSM. The positive button, in this case set the joystick button 0, which refers to the A button on the Xbox 360 and Xbox One controllers. There is a list at the end of this video which will give you a list of all settings for all buttons on these controllers. Again, at this point it would be a good time for you to pause the video and finish off the settings at your leisure. Once we've completed this, it's a good idea to save the scene and the project. At this point we can now move on to make the FSM. The first thing we need to do for that is to select our game object, in this case the wizard, look in the inspector, drag it down to add component and click the button. We then go down and select Playmaker and Playmaker FSM. You'll notice that that component has been added. We now, in this case, we'll rename to give it a meaningful name, and in this case the FSM is going to be called Get Buttons. We then click Edit to open up the FSM and start making the changes we need to make. The first thing we need to do is create a Boolean variable that's going to store whether the button has been pressed or not. In this case we'll call the button BLN for Boolean and A button. We select the type as a Boolean and click Add. Now that we have our variable set up, we can move on to the state. Firstly, click on it and rename the state to Get Buttons. Then we are ready to add a transition. And the first transition we are going to add is a finish transition. So what to do is right click on the state and add finish transition. You will see it here under the state name. Now that we have our transition in place, it's time to add the actions. And the first action we're going to add is Get Buttons. Click on the action browser and at the top type in Get Buttons. That will bring you up to the actions. Click on Get Buttons and add that action. First parameter you have to add is, if you remember correctly, when we were setting up the controller input, we called it A button. And we set up the Boolean variable and we're going to set that as the stored result. The second action we're going to add is the next frame event, which basically means that it's going to complete. Our first state is now set up, so we're going to add a second one and call it button pressed. Once you've done that, once you've added the state, rename it to button pressed, and then we're going to add an event. So click up on your top right and click events. Once you have events open, add an event and call it a button pressed. This is going to be a transition that will detect whether the button has been pressed and transition into the move. Once you've done that, right click on the state and select the transition called a button pressed, and also add another transition of finished. Our button pressed state now has the two transitions we need. So the next thing we're going to do is add our actions. So click on events, open the action browser, and the first action we're going to use is bool test. This is going to test our boolean variable to check if the button has been pressed. Once you have added that, select the drop down and select the boolean a button that we set up earlier. If it's true, then we go to say that the button has been pressed, so select a button pressed, and finally we add our second action, which is once again the next frame, and we join that up at the bottom and we select in the drop down finished. At this point, if you're kind of new to Playmaker, you will see the exclamation marks in the two states. What that means is we have transitions that are not yet connected. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to connect the finished to the button pressed. To do that, click on the left button on finished and drag it down to the button pressed. You'll now see the exclamation mark has disappeared. Next of all, we do the same for the finished and button press and join it back up to the get button. What that means is we're setting it up so that we have a loop to always check the button. Next, we add our third state, and we're going to call that a button pressed. And what that's going to do is move the character. So the next thing we do is we add a transition of finished and we join that up to get button, which completes our loop for that. Finally, you'll notice that the last thing we haven't joined up is the A button pressed. So left click on that and drag it up to A button pressed. And that will complete all our loops, which means that the states are all joined together, you'll have no exclamation marks, and basically you'll be ready to go. We've got one more thing to add, and that is going to be the final action in the A button state. So what we do is we go into there, add an action, and we select move controller move. And the game object will be self, and what we're going to do is click on the right button to actually move a vector, and in this case we're simply going to move it 1 unit in the X direction. And finally, once again, we'll do next frame move and join it up to the finished, which will obviously move us back to the get buttons. So we've completed our loop and we're basically now ready to go. Now that we're ready to actually test our state machine, the best idea here is to go back to the Playmaker editor and resize it. That's what you see me doing here. I'm going to resize Playmaker so that we can watch the state machine as we're actually running the game. So I'm just resizing here so that we can see the game running and we can see the effect that the state machine's having, so that we can check when a button's pressed and we will have a visual indicator of what's actually going on in the game. So that's what you see me here do. So once we've done that, as you can see, if you're working on 2 screens or 3 screens or 4K or whatever, this will be a lot easier. But in this case, we'll press the start button and now we're going to hit the Controller A button, and when you see that, you'll see the character moving. Now, as you can see, there is actually an issue here. So we'll have to stop the game, go back into our editor and our move action within the A action, and we unclick the button as you see there. And basically what we'll do now is restart, and again you'll see me pressing the A button and you'll now see the character move on the unit in the X direction, which is what we've set up. And that's this particular tutorial complete. If you've enjoyed it, then let me know in the comments. I've left here a complete listing of all the buttons on the Xbox 360 and Xbox One controllers. Thank you very much for watching.